What's up, everybody? This is your boy Uber Hikari, aka the Nerd Nigga, here to bring you another video with no frills, just the analysis. And today I'll be bringing you the season 2 episode 3 review of The Walking Dead, entitled Save the Last One. And before I get into this, let me just say this. Holy shit. Wow. Um I know in the last review I was griping a little bit about the stalling narrative progression because of the non-resolution of the Sophia subplot and also of the a little bit of the Carl subplot. But this episode was just so good. I mean, even before I review it, 10 out of 10 on a nerd scale. 10 out of 10. I don't even give a fuck about the Sophia subplot anymore. I don't care. This show, oh man, amazing. The writers, the producers, and the directors of this show are working some real magic here. And I mean, even if you don't like the show, you have to respect it because one, it doesn't pull any punches, and two, it continues to deliver complex material with maturity. I mean, it just does not um look down on its viewers at all. I mean, this is just some amazing writing that's being done here, ladies and gentlemen. Just awesome episode. But before I get into this episode, spoiler warning. So if you've gotten to this part of the video, I'm letting you know right now, this review will contain spoilers. I just can't do a review of this episode without giving away all the most important elements of the episode. So you've been forewarned. If you go past this, this episode will be spoiled for you. Okay, so like I've been doing in the past, I'm gonna do this in two parts. The first part is the summary. The second part is a more analytical look at the episode. So basically, nothing happens in this episode, story wise. Shane and Otis are still trying to get out of the school where they've located the respirator and the medicine that's needed to save Carl's life. And the others in the group are not really doing much of anything. It's nighttime, so people aren't really doing anything, which is basically what I said would happen in the last review. Because until we get resolution of the Sophia subplot and the Carl subplot, then, like I said, the narrative progression of the story just can't move forward until those two things are resolved. So that's basically it for the summary. So now let's jump into the analytical side of this review. And I want to talk about two things specifically. The first thing I want to talk about is narrative technique, and the narrative technique in this episode was just absolutely stunning, and the aesthetic part of this episode, which was also just beautiful. Just I mean, it blew my mind. So the episode starts in median ray. And median ray is a narrative technique where you begin the story either in the middle or at the end. So think of the movie Pulp Fiction, for example. That movie starts at the ending and then tells the story going backwards through a series of flashbacks and by messing with the narrative structure of the progression, the natural progression of the story. So it starts with Shane in the bathroom and him cutting off his hair and looking at himself in the mirror. Um, when we first see this scene, it's not immediately clear what's going on, and so we don't get the proper context for understanding the scene until the end of the episode. Um, Also, the what they did with mood and with the manipulation of sight and sound, how they manipulated those two things were just amazing. So after that bathroom scene, I believe it's after the bathroom scene, it cuts to a slow motion scene of Shane and Otis running through the school so that they can, get away from the zombies because there's, a horde of zombies after them. However, there's a narrative voiceover of Rick telling his wife Lori a story about Shane and about a story about what he did when he was in high school. You know, a real funny story. And what this does is that because the rest of the episode, we don't know it at this point, but the rest of the episode is going to be about a huge moral decision that Shane has to make. And what we get here, however, is and we get a sense of identification with Shane, and we get a sense that the writers want us to sympathize with Shane. And stories like this, biographical stories, function similar to the way names function. That is to say, names are a form of humanizing someone. So rather than calling someone she or he or even it, which is a form of objectification, to call someone by their name is to recognize their humanity. And so this narrative voiceover of this scene, with a story about Shane, functions as a way to help us identify with Shane and also help us to identify him as a human being, to recognize his humanity, even though later on we understand that he has to make this huge moral decision. And so by recognizing his unique individual story, like I said, we get to recognize his humanity. And so this is important, although we don't know it at this time, for contextualizing the rest of the episode and to sort of put the rest of the episode in the proper perspective. Another instance of just awesome aesthetics and awesome directing and writing um, is um, is a scene that we cut to right after that. I believe it's right after that. My short-term memory is not as good as my long-term memory, so forgive me if I mess up the order in which this happens. But we cut to a scene where Sophia's mother, I believe her name is Carol, is in bed. It's at nighttime, like I said before, and she's crying in her sleep. She's sort of, half awake, half asleep, and just crying because, Sophia is missing. She's lost. And then that scene is interspersed with shots of Andrea loading bullets in a clip. And aesthetically, this may not seem like much, but when you take two disconnected events, like someone crying in their sleep and another person loading bullets, which upon first reflection don't seem to go together, and you put them together in a narrative form, that narrative form creates a move that again allows us to contextualize or to set up or to orient us towards the rest of the story. So this may seem simple, but it's actually very important for what comes after this. And again, this is just amazing writing, amazing use of aesthetics here. Okay, so the theme of parenthood also comes up again in this episode, but this time it's with the theme of parenthood comes up again. And this time it's not just about parental obligation. There's a new variation on this theme. So remember in the last episode review where I talked about Rick's hero complex and about how he has to recognize his role and the obligations that he has as a father to be by his son's side. Um, Now we have to think about the theme of parental obligations in a new way because Lori is questioning whether or not it would be the right decision to allow Carl to be saved by the doctor, which is probably shocking to a lot of you. I know I was a little bit shocked by this, and that's simply because we have a very visceral reaction um, when it comes to children and about whether or not children should be saved. And what the writers introduce here is a sort of visceral and moral subversion of what would generally be the case. But because we realize the extreme and extenuating circumstances that surround this decision, it sort of offers some sort of legitimacy to Laurie's concern about whether or not Carl um, should be allowed to live, about whether or not they should allow the doctor to operate on him and save his life. And this is very interesting. And if you think about it for a second, there is some precedent for this sort of moral questioning and this sort of moral reasoning. If any of you are familiar with Beloved by Toni Morrison, which is a novel about a woman who, rather than go back to slavery and rather than allow her children to be enslaved, she takes her baby and slams her baby up against the wall, dashes the baby's brains out, because she believes that it's preferable for the baby to die and for her to kill the baby rather than for her child to grow up in slavery. And so when you think about the extreme and extenuating circumstances, this sort of allows the writers to legitimate this line of reasoning and this line of moral reasoning. Okay, and so Lori is asking Rick about whether or not, as parents, they should allow Carl to die of his injuries. And she asks Rick in a very direct way. Lori does. She asks him why it would be better for him to live rather than for him to die. And at this point, Rick has no answer, which in a lot of ways is stunning, given his character. So you really get a sense of how serious it is when Rick, who has a hero complex, and when it comes to the question of whether or not his son should be allowed to continue to live by being operated on by the doctor, it's very stunning, and it adds another layer of intensity to this line of questioning. And the question that Lori is really posing to Rick, is the question about what it means to be human. I mean, I think 99% of us, not even 99, I mean, I can't imagine a person who would think that the only thing that human lives are valuable for is just being sustained. In other words, a human's life is more than just surviving, which is what these people are doing at this point. Civilization is gone, society is basically gone, and they're living from day to day, from one meal to the next, from one hot shower wherever they can find it to the next, under constant threat of zombie hordes. And Lori is posing the question to Rick. She's asking him, what it means to be human. In other words, saying that someone's humanity has to be more than just them surviving zombie hordes. And so Rick isn't able to answer this question at this point, but later on, Carl wakes up. And the first thing that he talks about is the deer that he saw. So he's talking about how beautiful the deer was. And how the deer, there was that moment of identification with him and the deer, with it, where he looks at the deer and the deer looks back at him. And after this scene, Rick confronts Lori about the question that she posed to him, and he points out that the first thing that Carl talked about when he woke up, was how beautiful the deer was. So it wasn't about the zombies. It wasn't about the extreme nature of their circumstances. It was about the beauty of the deer. And so the deer is at this point is kind of transformed into a symbol of beauty, and it's transformed into a symbol of hope. And so basically Rick's response to Lori is, that even though they're in the middle of these extreme circumstances where they're under constant threat of death, that there are still moments in life of intense identification with other human beings through an experience of the beautiful, and through having hope and through having solidarity in their struggle within this life. And so that's Rick's response to Lori, and he says that those moments of intense identification with other people by experiencing the beautiful and through having hope and solidarity, that those things are still worth fighting for, and that even in the midst of all of those things, that we should be grateful for every moment of beauty that we can still experience. And so that's his response to Lori. So let me just leave that off because there's some more to this, this sort of line of moral reasoning and of this line that we're being led down by the writers. And so let me just cut to what happens with Shane and Otis. And this is where the major spoiler will happen at. So again, if you've gotten to this point in the video, be forewarned that what comes after is going to be a major spoiler for you. Okay, so um actually, well, a little bit more about Carl. The doctor comes in and takes Carl's blood pressure and examines him a little bit. And Carl, he says that Carl might not make it if they don't operate now. So even though the Shane and Otis have not come back with the necessary medical supplies and with the respirator, he says if they wait any longer, then Carl will just slip away. So they begin the operation, and just before they're about to start, Shane comes back. However, Otis is not with him. And so Shane goes into this story about how he made it out, but how Otis didn't. And he says that Otis um basically covered for Shane while Shane escaped. And Otis was left behind with the zombies. Um, and this is a little bit suspicious. First of all, we up to this point, when we cut to the scene of Shane and Otis, the last time we left them, they were both still running away from the zombies, and it was never alluded to that Otis was about to sacrifice himself for Shane. So we never see this part. So this would be sort of off screen. They would have off screened Otis's death, which would have been very interesting. This is what I'm thinking about as I'm watching the episode. I'm thinking, well, this is a very gory TV show, and this show never pulls any punches. So it's sort of suspicious that they would off screen Otis's death. Um, and then I continue to think about it, and I also think about what happens when we last see Otis and Shane. Shane looks towards Otis. The zombies are about to close in on them, and Shane asks Otis how many bullets he has left. And Otis says, "I only have 4 bullets left." And Shane was like, "Well, I only have 5 left, and one in the pipe, one in the chamber, so he has 6 bullets left." And so when we think about that scene, we start to realize that Shane's explanation for Otis's death is a little bit suspicious, because how can Otis cover for Shane if Otis only has 4 bullets left? I mean, that's somewhat suspicious. And then I started thinking about the fact that Shane is also a morally suspect character. And unless you've forgotten about what Shane has done, think about when he's pointed the gun at Rick, how he was, eyeing Rick with the shotgun. And also don't forget the fact that Dale saw that, and he still hasn't spoken about that. And it's not clear if he ever will speak about that. And also remember that Shane almost raped Lori. Remember the scene where they're at the CDC, and Shane is a little bit, well, not a little bit, maybe he was a little bit drunk, maybe he was a lot drunk. We just don't know, but he was about to rape Lori. Um, and so then since Shane has come back with the medical supplies and the respirator that's needed to save Carl's life, Carl is saved. But then there is we get what's called a frame story. So this is another narrative technique that the writers have used. They've used a narrative technique that's known as a frame story. And a frame story is a story within a story. So think about flashbacks. Those are examples of frame story techniques where we have one level where the story is progressing, but then as the story progresses, we get another story within that story, which is a flashback. And so we get a flashback after Carl has been saved. And it shows how Shane really survived. Okay, so, and this is the major spoiler warning. I've already alluded to it, so you've been spoiled at this point. So Shane and Otis are running away. There's zombies right behind them. Shane has sprained his ankle. Otis is, fat and out of shape. So he's having a hard time running himself. And so Shane looks towards Otis. He says, "I'm sorry." They're both down to their last bullet. Shane looks at Otis and says, "I'm sorry." He shoots him in the leg. So Otis goes down, and Shane grabs the medical supplies from off of Otis. he walks away, or rather limps or runs away as best he can, since he sprained his ankle, and he basically leaves Otis to be eaten by zombies. And we see, like I said, this is a very gory TV show. We actually see multiple zombies biting into Otis, and Otis screaming after Shane. So that's how, by basically allowing Otis to be killed, Shane is able to get away. And I know I've already spoken a little bit about how Shane is a somewhat morally suspect character, but I'm gonna try and defend his decision here. And I don't really think that Shane can be blamed here. And here's why. Um, when we think about morality and we think about ethics, the most important thing to us is human life. We think that the worst thing that can happen to a person is, in most circumstances, death. Barring a few exceptional cases, like maybe slavery or torture or rape, but for the most part, most humans would think, or most people would think that human life is sacrosanct, and that human life is the most important and the most valuable things um, that we have and that we should care about. So we're in a situation with Shane and Otis where both of them cannot escape. It's pretty clear. I mean, it's not certain, but it's pretty clear from the situation that they're in that both of them will probably die. But if Shane shoots Otis, and allows him to be eaten by zombies so that he can escape, rather than two people dying, now only one person has to die and one person is saved. And from an ethical standpoint, that's probably preferable, to allowing two people to be killed by zombies. Um, well, to allow one person to be killed by zombies rather than two people. But more than that, we have to think about this. By shooting Otis and allowing him to be eaten by zombies, and by escaping himself, Shane's life is not only spared, but also Carl's life is spared, because he gets away with the medical supplies that are necessary, for Carl to be operated on, and that's necessary for Carl's life to be saved. Now, the only thing you can say against Shane in this particular situation, because like I said before, from an ethical standpoint, it's preferable that only one person dies rather than two people. Well, three people really, because Otis would have died, Shane would have died, and Carl might have died if the medical supplies didn't get to him. The only thing that you can say against Shane at this point is that, well, why didn't he just stay behind and, get eaten by the zombies? I mean, he could have killed himself and stayed behind and let the zombies eat him. Um, the first thing I would say to that is that, he may have been able to commit suicide and leave his body behind so that the zombies could eat him. But I'm not sure about this, but I think that the zombies prefer live humans rather than dead bodies. I'm almost certain about this because if you remember that scene at the CDC, there were numerous dead bodies outside of the CDC. But the zombies didn't eat the dead bodies. They came after the people who were alive in the group, because remember they're calling for Dr. Jenner to open the door so that they can come in because they're about to be attacked by the zombies, because they're coming after them rather than the dead bodies. So that's one reason why Shane probably shouldn't have just committed suicide, because that would not have stopped the zombies. They would have continued after Otis. um, but also think about this. Would any of you have stayed behind to get eaten by zombies? I mean, hell no. Most of us would not have done that. I know I wouldn't have done that. If I was in Shane's position, I would have told Otis, listen, I'm sorry, but you got to take one for the team. I would have shot him in the leg and left him behind and saved my own ass. And my suspicion is that 95% of you out there would have done the exact same thing if you were in a similar situation. That most of you would not have stayed behind and suffered would have been, uh, probably one of the most horrible ways to die, to be eaten to death. I mean, none of you would have done that. So from where I stand, and from an ethical standpoint, I think um, Shane's decision was the most ethical, and also Shane's was the most normal or the most natural reaction for any of us to have in that sort of situation. And again, think about the narrative voiceover that I talked about at the beginning of the episode, where we're made to identify with Shane by listening to his story. And so at this point, we're made to think back on the beginning with that narrative voiceover, and to not only recognize Shane's humanity, but to recognize the limits of his humanity. I mean, as human beings, from a psychological standpoint, there's only so much that we can endure. And I would argue that being eaten by zombies is not something that any of us, well, not any, but most of us, upwards of 95% of us, could not endure. Okay, so at this point that we have now gotten the real story behind how Shane escaped with the medical supplies and how Otis didn't, let me return to that deer that I talked about earlier, which Rick turns into a symbol of hope and beauty, as an explanation um, uh, for why Lori should be for allowing Carl to be operated on and to live in this situation. um, Now we understand the very high cost that that deer comes at. I mean, if you want to be able to experience the beauty of life and to experience hope and to struggle with in solidarity with other people who are alive in this zombie apocalypse, you have to understand that those moments of intense identification with other people by experiencing beauty and hope comes at a very, very high cost, um, namely at the cost of Otis's death. And so by messing around or by playing with narrative structure, the writers have produced an argument that goes as follows. Um, First, we get Lori's challenge that she poses to Rick. Then Rick doesn't respond. Carl wakes up and talks about the deer. And then Rick uses that deer as a response to Lori. And then Carl lives. um but we understand we have to contextualize the fact that Carl lives by understanding that he's only able to live because Shane makes the decision to kill Otis and to as an opportunity to get away and to get the medical supplies that are necessary to save his life. So we have to ask ourselves this question. Is the cost of experiencing these, few moments of beauty worth living in this world? And so the theme or the question of suicide comes up once again. And I would say, hell no, it's simply not worth it. It is simply not worth it. But again, I invite your comments and your perspective on this issue. But not only do we have to think about whether or not those few moments of beauty are worth it, we have to contend with an even more brutal truth, which is that in some situations, you'll have to sacrifice someone else's life to keep yourself alive and to keep someone else alive. And so the narrative technique that the writers used in this episode was just absolutely breathtaking and amazing, because they could have told the story in its natural progression, and so we could have ended at least on a high note that Carl was saved. But they don't do that because we only learn the truth about how Shane was able to survive, um, and about Otis's death after. We only learn this after Carl is saved, and so the episode leaves off um um on the scene with Shane in front of the mirror in the bathroom. And so we actually come full circle from where we started. And I just have to put this out there. Shane is not a ruthless person for what he did. He's not a brutal person for what he did, because if we were in similar circumstances, most of us would not do the same thing. And on top of that, we're made to understand, when we're in the bathroom scene with Shane and he's looking at himself in the mirror, you can see that he's not happy with himself, and that he's genuinely traumatized by the situation, because he's looking at his image in the mirror. And so we're led to believe, or led to think about the relationship between that image in the mirror, and the relationship between that image in the mirror and his identity. And that's why he sort of shaves his head at the end, because um, he doesn't want to look at himself in the mirror. He doesn't want to be the person who shot Otis in the leg and allowed him to be eaten by zombies. And he doesn't like what the situation has made him become. And so with that, I leave you with this question in mind. Again, is are those few moments of beauty worth living in a world um like this, where you have to sacrifice somebody's life, one person's life, to save, two other people's lives? So again, this is your boy Uber Hikari, aka the Nerd Nigga. Just brought you another video with no frills, just the analysis. Peace and have a blessed day.